For a time when I was in high school, I had a recurring babysitting job with a family. We were babysitting for Debbie and JJ. Debbie and JJ were members of our church and friends of the family. They were great kids, and this worked out great for me to have this recurring job because this was just at the time that my high school social studies teacher decided that the best way for high school students to spend their time is to be coloring in hand coloring maps, and Debbie and JJ like to color. This worked out great. And so I got to go over every week and spend a couple hours with them, and we'd play board games, and I didn't just make them do my homework. We'd play board games, and we'd read stories, and we'd have fun together, and they are great kids. And I got to know them well. That Debbie is smart and kind, and JJ is funny. He is energetic and optimistic. And I was thinking about them this week and thinking about how much I would enjoy if you could have the chance to meet them and get to know them. And thinking about how it would be to bring them here and to introduce them to you. And I thought to myself, yes, I would like that very much. And thinking that probably the first thing you would notice about JJ is that he has Down syndrome. Now, JJ is energetic and a hard worker and funny and visionary, and he is everything that you want to have as your very good friend. But you have to get to know him to see that, right? You have to get to know who he is. And let's be honest, when people first see JJ, they sometimes miss out on that chance because we are wired to notice when people are different. It comes from that time when we're surrounded by lions and tigers and bears, and noticing things that were out of place or different meant our survival, but that stuck with us. And now it treats us, and it works in us a little different. And you and I both know that for people like JJ or my friend Tom who lived in a wheelchair, or even just people who are walking down the street in a part of town where we didn't anticipate them, we notice them. We notice that they're different. They catch our eye, right? They're out of place, or they're other, or they're those people. We're wired for it. It used to be a survival thing, but nowadays it mostly just helps us to notice when people are different than us. So it's not a surprise that these disciples walking down the street in Jerusalem, that their eyes would be snagged by this man sitting at the side of the road. Now, he's a blind man. He's a beggar. He's sitting there crouched against the wall, down in the dust, with his bowl held out, his head cocked to the side so he can listen for that dropping coin that he's hoping for, or maybe the shuffle of a kick that's heading his way. He's there beside the road, and it's oh so very sad, but it is the Sabbath, and it's just one guy. There's a whole bunch of beggars, and there's all kinds of rules about this, and whatever can we do? Oh, what a tragic situation. Hey, Jesus, who sinned? Whose fault is it? Who did this to this poor man? See, this is where our wiring starts to hurt us, right? Our wiring, that natural wiring that we have, starts to hurt us because we start to assume that different means worse than me. We start to assume that by a physical appearance, that there are characteristics that go with it. We start to assume by what we see that someone must be this particular way. And we have a word for that, don't we? We call that racism. And that racism hurts us because it is assuming about someone, it is importing inappropriate characteristics based on appearance. And racism is a sin because it keeps us separate from God. Racism is a sin because it prevents us from seeing God's beloved the way that He does. And it separates us from who God is and how God is at work in the world. And so for these disciples walking along, they see this man and think, well, this will be an interesting conversation, but it is the Sabbath. Yeah, it's very sad. There are all kinds of rules here, and it's just one guy. If we help one, we have to help them all, and what can we do? Because there's all kinds of rules about this. They think this will be interesting. We can have a lively debate, and we can talk about the ethics of it. Hey, Jesus, see that guy? Whose fault is it? See, the disciples saw him and assumed, didn't they? The disciples saw him and were ready to write him off. Jesus saw this man and thought, I will die for him. And before they know it, Jesus is down in the dirt. He's down there in the dust, kneeling beside this man, and he's spitting there into the dust to make mud. By the way, I learned my new favorite word. The Greek verb there for spit is ptuo. Isn't that fabulous? You see why I like it? So Jesus ptuos there into the dirt, and he's getting his hands in there. This is Jesus getting that mud up under his fingernails, and he's mashing it around, and he's kneading it, which is very, very much off limits there on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to knead anything. And he's stirring, and he's ptuoing, and he's making this mud, and then he sort of crouches over to this blind man who's leaning up against the wall there beside the road. He reaches out and puts his hand on his cheek and takes that mud that he has made, that clay and dust and mud, and he spreads it on his eyes, making sure he coats every last eyelash, all the way side to side, and then again the other side, coating and covering. And the disciples are watching, and they're thinking, what are you doing? You're making things worse. This man is already blind. It's hard enough to get around, and now you're making him go wash his face. What are you doing, Jesus? And by the way, you're not supposed to do that. You're breaking all the rules here. This is dangerous. The disciples are just shaking their heads and wondering, what is Jesus doing? Well, by the time he gets back, he's a different man. He stumbles off and gropes his way to that pool that's called scent. And he washes himself, and he comes back, and he can see. And I find it fascinating how much trouble the people around him have knowing what to call him. They don't know what to refer to him as. What should we call this guy? I mean, he's always been the guy outside the gate. And he's a blind beggar, so we always knew where to find him. So it was easy to step over him. It was easy to ignore him. We knew where he'd be, but now we can see he shows up all over the place. Every time we turn around, there he is. And what are we going to call him? And if you go through it, you'll notice they try a whole bunch of different things. The guy who used to be blind. The guy who was blind from birth. The beggar. Even after he gets his sight back, they still call him the blind guy. The man who had regained his sight. What are we going to call this guy that no longer fits into my predictable little box? And when I know where I can find him so I can step over him and I don't have to really see him, what shall I call him? And Jesus has disappeared through all of this. Did you notice that? Jesus isn't in the story until the end. Jesus comes and finds him. And it's only then, when Jesus is there and comes to him, it's only then that he's referred to as him. Person. Child of God. Him. Only Jesus sees him as God sees him. Beloved, child, worth dying for. I learned this week that within my own lifetime, up until 1974, so 1907 to 1974, the state of Indiana had a law on the books that allowed for the forced sterilization of people like JJ. We were the first in the nation to pass something like that. Yay us, leading the way. And other states also followed suit. In fact, I was even more disturbed to discover that the Nazis got some of the ideas for eugenics and sterilization from us here in this country. And during that stretch of time from 1907 to 1974, there were about 2,500 people like JJ who were forced to be sterilized in our states. And then I was disturbed to learn that there is still a precedent on the books, a ruling by the Supreme Court in 1927 that has not been overturned. It is the law of the land that would allow forced sterilization anywhere in this country of people like my friend JJ. This sin of racism is still out there, and it is still dangerous. It is dangerous to us, and it is dangerous to those whom we are not seeing, isn't it? It is a brokenness that keeps us away from God. And it's still there in each of us. Now, the good news, sisters and brothers, is here in the church, we already know what we do with sin. We already know what to do with sin, don't we? We confess it. We bring it to Jesus. We tell it to the one who gets down in the mud, the one who takes all our sin to the cross for us and because of us. We give it to Jesus because he's the one who gets down into the muck of the world in a new creation. It is in him that we are reborn, and it is in him that we see. It is Jesus by blood and sweat and words and tears, by embrace and by stretching out his arms. It is Jesus who takes all our sin, and this one too. When we are Christ, there is new creation. We know what to do with sin. We confess it. We bring it to mind. We bring it to Jesus because he is the one who recreates us. So I invite you to hear the words of Jesus for you today. I invite you to hear those words that Jesus spoke when he found him. And hear these words for you today. Do you believe in the Son of Man? Do you believe in me? Lord Jesus, open our eyes that we may see.